My name is Leola McKenzie, and I'm the director of the Citizen Review Board. I am so thrilled to see all of you here today. We have 215 people who are registered for the conference, and although all the seats aren't filled right now, by tomorrow they should be. So thank you all for making the journey down here to Eugene, Oregon. Few little stats that Amy gave me about the people who are here. We have 48 people from Lane County. Judge Love, I'm sure, is very happy to hear that. The people who've come from the farthest away, Judy Springer and Georgianne Laisley from Lakeview. We have full boards, at least one of the boards from each of the following counties. All of the board members are here. And hold your applause till the end. Clackamas, Clatsop, Coos, Crook, Jefferson, Deschutes, Douglas, Harney, Jackson, Lake, Lincoln, Lynn, Marion, Multnomah, Polk, Washington, and Yamhill. So way to go, getting everyone here. If you are a new CRB volunteer board member who was just appointed during the year 2015, if you could please stand up for a minute. New board members, thank you. So I don't know if the family that volunteers together stays together, but we do have several couples and family members that are on CRB. So I just wanted to recognize them real quickly. From Jackson County, we have Melissa Williams and her mother, Cindy Williams. Are they here yet? Lane County, we have Pat and Stephen John, and Lisa Ross and Eric Sternbach. From Malheur County, we have John and Lois Taggart. From Marion, we have Michael Livingston and Sarah Owens. And Polk County has the highest number of duos, with Dick and Linda Frensky, Elaine and Hollis Ferguson, and Andrea and Harvey Kramer. I would like to give a special thank you to our Citizen Review Board Advisory Committee members. You can easily identify those people because they have a little brown ribbon at the bottom of their name tag that says Advisory Committee. They provide advice and support throughout the year, and particularly provide information and suggestions for us for this conference. So we greatly appreciate all of their work. Wanted to let you know that the advisory committee met this morning, and we really want to have 20 advisory committee members on our advisory committee. We are reformatting the advisory committee a little bit. Instead of meeting quarterly, we're going to meet every other month. Those meetings will be on a Saturday, so if you're working and already taking a day a month off for CRB, you won't need to take another day off. But every other month on a Saturday, so 6 Saturdays a year, we want to have a diverse advisory committee, and if you're willing to be a part of it, we'd really like to have you. The advisory committee is going to be taking a very active role in implementation and overseeing the implementation of our new 5-year strategic plan. And additionally, they are going to be taking on some specific projects. One of the things that we talked about this morning is no findings and the impact of no findings, and should there be more no findings, and that's something that they really want to work together and address over the upcoming year. So if you're willing and interested in being a part of that, please talk to your field manager, have them forward your names on. If you see somebody with a brown ribbon, please feel free to ask them to tell you more about the CRB Advisory Committee. Yes? We are going to have the next meeting in Salem, and then we will decide from there where meetings will be. Yes. Okay, also, big giant thank you to Amy Church, and I think she's still out there, and David Smith. Is David in here? Dave? All of you know, I'm sure, that Amy is our volunteer resource coordinator, and Dave is our field manager, and he's the lead trainer for the Citizen Review Board. Between the two of them, they coordinated this whole conference and organized the staff. They tried to keep all of us focused and make us make their deadlines so that we could bring you the best possible event ever. And I really give them a big thank you for all of their work. Then can we have all of our staff stand up? Our staff have the blue ribbons, and thank you. Our staff take on organizing breakout sessions, organizing the plenary sessions, helping to make sure that the conference runs smoothly, and assisting you with getting here and getting everything set up. So I really thank them for all of their work. Today, I am very happy that we have the Honorable Valerie Love with us. She has been a circuit court judge here in Lane County for 5 years. And prior to that, she worked as a deputy district attorney here in Lane County and handled domestic violence cases and financial fraud cases. She's been involved in a variety of different community organizations and activities. Recently, or she will be within the next few weeks, honored by the Lane County Bar Association here with the Distinguished Service Award. And this is a yearly award that the Bar Association honors one attorney in the county, and she is getting it primarily for the work that she does around abuse and neglect children and families who are involved in this system. So let's give her recognition for that. She's the chief juvenile court judge here in Lane County and a big supporter of the CRB. Judge Love?
How's everybody doing? You excited for your conference? All right, good. I'm so happy to be able to wish you good afternoon and welcome you to this conference and Eugene. First and foremost, a big thank you to all of you for what you do. We couldn't do the work at the court. Children wouldn't be protected, families wouldn't be served if we didn't have you volunteering the time that you do as Citizen Review Board members. As you heard from Leola, we've got over 200 people, I believe, registered for the conference this weekend, and I understand most of the attendees are CRB board members and staff, but do we have any CASAs here? Excellent. And then other community stakeholders who's not CASA or not CRB board member, a couple of you. I think it's good to have a variety of folks attending this conference. There's always wonderful topics and so much useful information that's provided through this conference. This year, the conference includes all sorts of topics from the implications of legalized marijuana in child welfare cases to an overview of services for parents and children in care. Marijuana is a big issue that keeps coming up in hearings. There's also a session on safety in foster care, a session on the role of fathers in a juvenile dependency case, and a session on international reunification and adoption. There are also informative sessions on permanency plans for children and learning sessions for strategies to engage youth in their CRB reviews and support LGBTQ youth in care. There's an expanded Discovery Cafe which offers small group discussions on many of the session topics and opportunities to strengthen your practice as board members. As I walked in the room, I was particularly thrilled to see that you're having a session on homeless youth. We struggle with that issue here in our county, always concerned about when we have youth that don't have a safe place to put their head down at night. And we see that with a lot of our older teen kids that have been in care for a while. So that's sort of an issue that's close to my heart. I applaud all of you for coming here and spending 2 days learning and improving as Citizen Review Board members, because as I said earlier, the work that you do is absolutely essential and critical, and we couldn't function without you. So here's some stats that make me kind of tired just reading them. In 2015, the CRB conducted 3,482 reviews statewide of 4,584 children, giving a total of 35,538 volunteer hours to the state. I think you deserve a round of applause for that. And for each of those reviews, you made findings and recommendations that improve DHS practice and inform the court of any issues or barriers in a specific case. As I think you're all aware of, the problems facing Oregon's most vulnerable families, they're just not getting easier, they're getting more complex. And as these cases grow more complicated and the issues of families grow more complex, it's really important that every single case receive a timely, thorough review. It's important that we ensure that every family is getting assistance towards reunification, that every child is able to achieve permanency as quickly as possible, and most importantly, that every child in foster care is safe. And so, as we're all aware of, safety in the foster care system has been an issue that has been in the news lately, and it was really troubling and concerning and disheartening to learn that children who were placed in foster homes were not always safe, and those homes were not always appropriate. It is simply unacceptable that any child in foster care suffer further neglect or abuse. And in my mind, it's simply unacceptable that any child in foster care is not fully nurtured and well supported. There's been a lot of discussion across the state about what can be done to keep kids in care safe. And during the short session earlier this year, the legislature passed several bills related to child welfare and established the Governor's Child Foster Care Advisory Commission to address, among other things, incidents of abuse, neglect, and maltreatment of children in substitute care. While DHS is ultimately responsible for keeping kids in care safe, the CRB, CASA, and the courts have an important role in ensuring safety for every child in care. I know that the CRB recently developed a 5-year strategic plan, and one of the strategies is for the CRB to review the case of every child in substitute care more than 6 months, at least once per year. This strategy will allow the CRB to have an impact on every child who is in foster care more than 6 months. That's an important first step, but in order to have the maximum impact, your reviews must address safety in foster care. I know from reading the findings and recommendations of the Lane County CRB boards that boards focus the most attention during reviews to the health and well-being of children in care. I urge you, all of you, to spend some of that time asking about safety, making sure that the caseworker is visiting with the child every month and is in the foster home every other month. I think it's also during your reviews, ask everyone at the table when that's happened. Ask children's attorneys when that's happened. Ask where it's happened. And I think if you have documents from prior hearings, take a look at whether foster parents appeared at that hearing. There's ways that you can look at the information that you're provided, I think, to further be aware of potential safety issues while kids are in care. And I think that's something the court needs to be doing more, as well as everybody who's reviewing these cases. Ask the caseworker about their last visit to the foster home to share whether they had the opportunity to speak with the child alone, whether they saw the child's room, and observe the child's interactions with others in the foster home. For me, it's really helpful when folks can describe a picture so you can kind of put yourself there to see what that child's life and experience is like. As we saw from the situation at Give Us This Day, many caseworkers never ventured beyond the reception areas of the foster homes. Had they gone into the children's rooms and spent time in the homes, many of the safety issues would have been uncovered. By asking specific questions about not just the frequency of the caseworker visits, but also the substance of those visits, as well as the length of time of those visits, you can help to ensure that children in care are safe. As volunteers with the CRB, I know that keeping kids in care safe is a priority for you. And let's make sure it's also a priority during your reviews, and I will commit that it's going to be a priority during my review process as well. I hope that this conference provides tools and resources for you to continue your work, reviewing how well both the court and child protection system as a whole meets the needs of the children and the families that we serve. Again, I can't even begin to fully express how much we value you. You are so appreciated, and the public service that you provide to make sure that our children and families are well served and that kids are safe. We can't measure it. So again, thank you for all you do. We're thrilled to have you in Eugene this weekend. Have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Judge Love. I think all of us need the reminder and need to remind ourselves every day that safety is a paramount concern for all of the children in care. We must ensure that every child in foster care is safe. The name of this conference is Every Day Counts, and that's because for a child in foster care, every day they spend in care is a day that they don't spend in a permanent family, and every child deserves to grow up with a family. As CRB members, you ensure that DHS operates with a sense of urgency, always striving to establish permanency for children. You do this because it's best for children and families, but also because you know that children who age out of foster care face dire circumstances. A national foster care reporting system called the AFCAR system in 2014 gave us some of the following stats. Over 22,000 youth aged out of foster care in the United States. We know that less than 3% of them will earn a college degree. 71% of these young women will be pregnant by the age of 21, and 1 in 5 will experience homelessness. For LGBTQ youth, the situation is even worse. While the general population is only 10% LGBTQ, the homeless youth population is close to 40%. LGBTQ youth are vastly overrepresented in the homeless population. As CRB board members, you must always be encouraging DHS to work towards permanency, to constantly evaluate whether kids are can safely return home, or whether another plan can be achieved. The worst outcome for a child in foster care is to leave foster care with no permanent connections and no support. Homelessness in Oregon is a growing problem, and for our former foster youth, it's reached epidemic proportions. Here to address some of those efforts being made in Oregon and to support our homeless youth is Beth Burns. Ms. Burns is the executive director of PAIR. PAIR builds positive relationships with homeless and transitional youth through education, art, and recreation to affirm personal worth and create more meaningful and healthier lives. Each year, PAIR serves almost 900 homeless and transitional youth in the Multnomah area. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Burns.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I very much appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. In fact, when Christina called PAIR, she called looking for a speaker for today, and the person on the other end said, "Oh, well, Beth here is a really good speaker." That person was my husband, and so I hope it goes okay. I've been working with homeless youth in downtown Portland for over 18 years. I'm the mother of a 3-year-old, and also I'm currently a foster mom to a 16-month-old. It has been an incredible and eye-opening and very rewarding experience for my family and myself. Youth homelessness, I actually have never used one of these, so wait one sec. Okay, there we go. All of the slides that you're going to see today are pictures of youth from PAIR and artwork by the young people that we work with. Youth homelessness is a tragedy. It's not just a quiet, isolated, personal tragedy. It's a tragedy for our entire community. And right now, homelessness is pushing all of us to face our fears, our prejudices, our worries. And I know that as a community, we're all trying to solve and answer this problem. Hundreds of homeless young people are in plain sight every day. Mostly, they just blend in. They're young people in their late teens and early 20s, and they're navigating a treacherous path into adulthood. The streets, with their myriad of dangers, are usually the first refuge for many of these youth. Youth homelessness is as subtle as it is insidious and can be difficult to measure. The Oregon Runaway and Homeless Work Group estimates that there's 24,000 unaccompanied youth in Oregon, and that approximately there's 1,500 to 2,000 homeless youth in Multnomah County on any given day. There's a too common notion that these young people are making some kind of lifestyle choice, that they're rebels and thrill seekers. But homelessness isn't thrilling. It's dirt, isolation, trauma, sadness, and absolute vulnerability. Classifying homeless youth as juvenile delinquents results in exclusion, criminalization, and oppression. For the vast majority of youth I've met over the last 18 years, going home isn't an option. In fact, most are fleeing. They have decided that the challenges and dangers of living in a street environment are preferable to continuing the life they experienced at home, in foster care, and group homes. For these youth, family reunification is unlikely due to the significant challenges facing their parents or caregivers or a history of maltreatment. For anyone experiencing homelessness, the problem is rarely solved by simply finding a place to live. For homeless children and young people, it's an ever more complicated issue. A series of complex and harrowing circumstances have forced these kids onto the streets, and each of them carries really deep emotional and psychological scars. Among young people living on the streets, the feelings of isolation and lack of self-worth are pervasive, and each day they struggle to meet their most basic fundamental needs. Things that a lot of kids take for granted: food, water, warmth, a place to go to the bathroom or clean up, a safe place to sleep. Safety is a luxury. School is often a memory, and constructive growth is stifled. Unaided, their potential to grow into healthy adults is a near impossibility. PAIR's been around for about 14 years. Our goal is to build positive relationships with homeless and transitional youth. We use education, art, and recreation as tools to help them develop the confidence and the feelings of self-worth that are needed for them to grow into having healthier and more meaningful lives. At PAIR, we look at every kid in front of us as strong, capable, and valuable human beings. We believe every homeless youth has a future. That painting up there says, "You can't stop me." We admire every homeless youth's intelligence, capacity for humor, love, and growth in the face of great adversity. We meet today's needs by listening, problem-solving, offering safe space, and wholesome meals. We engage young people through mentorship and experiences that create a place for exploration and growth. Our outdoor wilderness recreation program takes kids once a week out into the wilderness on trips. This is them rock climbing, I believe, down at Smith Rock last summer. With the help of the community, we offer love, build trust, and create hope. We support every individual youth's journey to tomorrow. So who is a homeless youth? Homeless youth are complicated, they're beautiful, they're talented, they're funny, and they're often suffering. They've survived traumatic childhoods, including abuse, neglect, and ultimately loss of their parents and caregivers. There's many different definitions of a homeless youth, but the one that we use is an individual who's between the ages of 12 and 24. They're unaccompanied, without a safe, stable living arrangement. They are possibly living in shelters, on the streets, in cars, or in vacant buildings. Sometimes you can find them couch surfing or living in other unstable circumstances. It's not always easy to identify youth on the streets for multiple reasons. One is that they don't often spend time in the same places as homeless adults. They're often a lot less willing to disclose that they're experiencing homelessness. We know this is particularly true in our schools. And they also may work harder to blend in with their peers who aren't homeless. The factors impacting youth homelessness are complex and differ from those impacting other homeless populations. Youth homelessness is unique because young people are physically, emotionally, psychologically and socially still developing. They're adults in progress with unique strengths and assets. They enter into homelessness often with little or no work experience, and they often don't have life skills such as really basic things: cooking, money management, housekeeping, job searching. I've taught kids how to brush their teeth, how to comb their hair. They're often forced into leaving their education prior to completion, often as a result of their homelessness. And they experience high levels of criminal victimization, including sexual exploitation and labor trafficking. Research approximate between 1 and 1.6 million youth will experience homelessness in a given year. If they all lived in one U.S. city, it would be the 7th largest city in the United States. Almost 40% of the homeless youth population, or the homeless population, are young people under the age of 18. We know that one of the fastest growing populations of homelessness are families with children right now. 13 kids die on the street every day from abuse, disease, and suicide. That's 5,000 kids a year. And in the United States, as many as 20,000 kids are forced into prostitution by human trafficking networks every year. So why do youth end up homeless? Although the group is really diverse, there's often common pathways to homelessness. The majority of homeless youth have either run away, been kicked out of unstable environments, abandoned, involved with public systems, or have a history of residential instability and disconnection. So I'll start with family instability. In a recent study, researchers found that family conflict was the greatest reason for youth living on the streets. Common family experiences include child abuse and or neglect, domestic violence, parental substance use, and or mental health problems and family conflict. It's estimated that 40 to 60% of youth on the streets have experienced physical abuse, and this is probably underreported, and as well as 4 in 10 homeless youth have experienced sexual abuse. Then there's those who have been thrown on the street by life. Someone dies, a family begins to implode, a house burns down, or there's a natural disaster and families are scattered. This category also includes significant numbers of youth rejected by their parents or caregivers due to their sexual orientation, gender identity, and or lifestyle. As was mentioned earlier, multiple studies have shown that up to 40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. Family rejection for being who you are is enormously detrimental psychologically, and evidence suggests that these young people have increased depression and a sense of futility, which often can just lead to risk-taking and really self-destructive behaviors. At the same time, LGBTQ youth are targeted for even more exploitation on the streets than their straight homeless peers. Homeless youth who identify as LGBTQ are more likely to commit suicide than other youth. For some youth, family instability leads to involvement with the child welfare system, as you all know. These are vital programs, but can be strained to a breaking point. Children slip through the crack or age out of services and often aren't prepared for what lies ahead. We know that there's a disproportionate representation of foster youth among the homeless youth population. There is good news. For many, many, many years, I had identified that about 40% of the homeless population in Multnomah County had prior foster care experience. That number right now is down to 30%. We also know that there's a two-way relationship between youth homelessness and the criminal justice system. Youth involved in the criminal justice system are more likely to report unstable housing, and homeless youth report a high level of involvement in the criminal justice system. At least 20 to 30% report having been arrested. Often, a lot of these arrests are stemming from activities that are associated with survival. Many homeless youth report a history of residential instability, and this may stretch back all the way to when they were in a family. I'll never forget a young woman I met who was raised in Salem, and she had only ever lived in a tent with her family. She was born and raised outside of Salem in a tent. One study found that 40% of homeless youth who had parents had parents who received public assistance or lived in public housing. And we know that a family's poor economic situation can lead to family homelessness. Family homelessness can often lead to a young person being separated from their family. I meet a lot of young people whose parents are homeless, and they were homeless for a while, and they could not navigate the shelter system. It was often too full for families. There wasn't a way for them to stay together. In other instances, a lack of financial resources leads to older youth leaving the household, often to lessen the strain on their parents. I can't tell you how many times I hear, "My parents just couldn't afford me." A youth may move from couch surfing to the streets or other places like abandoned buildings as the effectiveness of their survival strategies in keeping them off the streets starts to wane. Many kids we meet have tried so hard to not end up on the streets. Some other things we know is that becoming pregnant or parenting can also result in residential instability, and up to as many as 50% of street youth will have a pregnancy experience, and most of those will give birth while they're still homeless. Some youth are just homeless because they're on their own and they can't afford housing, often due to unemployment or underemployment, and right now due to the extreme lack of affordable housing in our communities. While on the streets, homeless youth face devastating consequences, both short-term and long-term. I'm going to run through these. Substance abuse. Youth sometimes use substances to self-medicate for the trauma and pain that they've experienced. Often youth view substance abuse as helpful for treating physical and psychological problems. And often drugs can be a means of generating social capital that's necessary for survival in street culture. Some youth report that they feel that they have to be high in order to engage in the types of behavior that they feel are necessary to survive on the streets. Approximately 75%, homeless youth are approximately 75% more likely to self-medicate and abuse substances as a way to deal with the stress and trauma and abuse that they've endured. Some homeless youth engage in survival sex. In fact, some reports say that about 1/3 of homeless youth engage in survival sex. It's the exchange of sex for food, clothes, money, or drugs, or just a safe place to sleep. This puts them at great increased risk of HIV, Hep C, sexually transmitted infections, and unintended pregnancies. Homeless youth experience rape and assault rates 2 to 3 times higher than the general youth population. Dealing with traumatic events in daily life on the streets can have a strong negative impact on the health of young people. Homeless youth often have nutritional problems stemming from food deprivation and starvation, or just to real poor nutritional quality. They're more likely to have asthma and diabetes, and similar to homeless adults, many youth experience severely bad oral health. For homeless youth, the mental health consequences of trauma, including depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety, and PTSD, make their struggle for stability even more difficult. We often see behavioral problems like conduct disorders or oppositional defiant disorders. Homeless youth with previous histories of both physical and sexual abuse have been found to have the most severe psychological symptomatology and to be at greater risk of re-victimization. Homelessness can either be a cause of or a predictor of mental illness. Many youth create street families as an attempt to find the unconditional love and support that they didn't receive in their childhoods. These alliances, particularly with older youth, more seasoned street youth, can help these youth stay safer on the street, but they also accelerate their acculturation into street culture. We talked a little bit about parenthood already. For a small number of youth, pregnancy can serve as a catalyst for many positive changes, including getting off the street, stopping high-risk behavior and substance abuse, taking care of their health, and refocusing on a healthier future. Other youth, however, are unable to muster the internal or external resources to effect these type of changes, and ultimately their children end up in the protective services, repeating the cycle of separation and trauma. A lot of the youth we meet, they lack basic interpersonal and independent living skills. They don't have bank accounts. They don't know how to manage money. Many have difficulty reading social cues and connecting with other people. It's been demonstrated that serious traumatic experiences can change brain chemistry. As a result of trauma and the demands of the street, many youth become hypervigilant, impulsive, and have difficulty making appropriate choices. They also cannot determine who to trust and who not to trust. A lot of the kids we see have learning problems, low literacy skills, and haven't completed their high school education. And again, this one's coming up a lot right now, which is a lack of affordable housing. Regardless how they've become homeless, now they're burdened by lack of access to stable, affordable housing. Without a clear pattern of housing stability in their lives, youth who are homeless may have difficulty breaking the cycle. Perhaps the most important health intervention needed by youth experiencing homelessness is housing. Building supported services around stable housing will allow youth to secure a path to futures filled with hopes and dreams. So, street culture. Homelessness among younger people is not just simply a housing issue. Being on the streets refers to a complex psychological state or worldview connected to a perceived lack of options that is intrinsically linked to a youth's identity and self-worth. Working effectively with street-affected youth we describe it as cross-cultural work. Youth on the streets have adapted to a subculture of survival that has extremely different expectations, values, identities, hierarchies, language, etc., and it will take time for them to adjust. Though the subcultures that exist on the streets are often unhealthy and unlawful, it's really important, and we train our volunteers and our staff to understand this deeply, that the subculture of the streets is meeting critical emotional needs for young people that haven't been met adequately elsewhere. It's totally unfair and unrealistic to expect youth to immediately drop the values that have helped them to survive outdoors when they enter into our programs. The get a job and go home theory simply does not work or apply for the vast majority of young people under the age of 25 living on the streets. One of the most important factors in helping youth transition out of street life is addressing issues of personal worth and conceptual and perspective needs rather than just simply meeting their basic physical needs. It's impossible to talk about homeless youth without discussing the impact of trauma and chronic stress on the developing brain and early childhood development. The neurological wiring of our brains is hugely impacted by childhood experiences. Evidence increasingly suggests that the wiring begins in utero and continues through most of our life. The area within the brain that experiences the most change during adolescence is the prefrontal cortex, which functions basically as the CEO of the brain. While this area is still developing, adolescents and young adults are more likely to make decisions based on the primitive brain centered in the limbic system. They're more likely to take risks, overestimate the rewards of engaging in risky behaviors, and be more prone to operate from a flight or fight response. Due to the trauma and chronic stress that results in homelessness, the brains of homeless youth are wired entirely differently than the brains of young people who have not experienced chronic stress and trauma. Depression, aggressiveness, anxiety, memory problems, PTSD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and many others are common results of this. We are all hardwired to survive, but homeless youth have downloaded the failure app due to compounded risk factors that way outweigh their protective factors. Should I tell a funny story? I'm sorry. I have plenty of them. In fact, I do want to tell a story briefly about getting back to, we're going to get there we'll get there in a second. I'll depress you for a few more minutes. All right, so how do you survive on the streets? You have to remember that when you're working with homeless youth, survival is their primary goal. Most other values and accepted behaviors are based on this goal. So they frequently are in life-threatening situations, and they don't judge behaviors and actions based on the same moral and legal criteria that we may. Their criteria is often whether or not this behavior is actively going to contribute to their survival. Value and credibility are most usually determined by one's capacity to survive in a hostile environment. Also, the kids, a lot of the young people we work with have street names. They may refer to themselves as Rabbit or Spider or many other things that I have refused to call them because they've been so brutal. But they do this often to maintain, it's like creating a new identity so that the person who's surviving, the person who's involved in street culture is not the same person that Michael is. And we know that young people are making changes, that that things are internally changing for them. When Spider comes in the room and you're like, hey, Spider, what's up? And Spider's like, no, my name is Jimmy. And you're like, oh, yes, Jimmy's here. And we know at that point that things are changing. Nearly 43% of young people say that they were assaulted with weapons while living on the streets. It can be a very violent culture. So values and mores, as we were just talking about survival. One other thing, or many other things, but the adults, homeless youth have very good reason to be distrustful of adults. The adults in their world have often failed them miserably, and mistrust has become a survival mechanism. This often extends to adult institutions such as schools, hospitals, social services, law enforcement, and even employment. Even those of us who are here to help are viewed as potential exploiters and predators until proven otherwise. I had a young woman who I worked dearly with for years and years, and one day I just came to work grumpy, and I was kind of a jerk. And I was just sort of just a jerk to her, and I went home that night, and I sort of I felt horrible about it, and I remember being really pained, and the next day I came in and I said, hey, Jean, can I talk to you? Can we go outside? The room was packed. And she said, okay. So we go outside and I was like, hey, I really just want to acknowledge that my behavior was unacceptable yesterday. And she starts bawling. And I'm thinking, oh, good gosh. I was a jerk, but it wasn't that bad. And she is just sobbing and sobbing. And she looks at me and she's like, no adult has ever apologized to me. At the core, street families are, young people, like I said, often form street families as a way to survive. A street family, they're referred to folks as mom, dad, brother, sister. This isn't an attempt to lie or manipulate, but it really does indicate the emotional need served by those that assume a familial role. Youth have a hard time disconnecting from their street families, and this frequently can become a barrier to services, including shelter. Sometimes this dynamic also plays out into the perception that youth are choosing to remain homeless by refusing services. I will stay here for a second. And lastly, you see a lot of young people out there with pets. You know, homeless young people have pets for the same reasons that almost anybody else has a pet: companionship, protection, and therapeutic service. Loyalty to one's pet is an important value among homeless youth. Often youth are unwilling to abandon their pets, again, to access services. Particularly, we know this is a problem in Multnomah County with the shelters. This can be misconstrued, again, as choosing homelessness. Support for homeless youth in Multnomah County is actually very strong. The Homeless Youth Continuum is made up of 4 agencies: Janus Youth Programs, Native American Youth and Family Center, New Avenues for Youth, and Outside In. And between them, they offer shelters, case management, housing options, drug and alcohol support, mental health support, education, and fun as well. There's a lot of other organizations in Multnomah County doing really great work. PAIR, Street Church, The Underground, Dinner and a Movie, local churches and adult agencies. The system, Multnomah County system, the homeless youth system, is designed to serve approximately 1,000 youth annually. One of the interesting things about working with homeless youth is that their progression is never linear. It's never a straight line. It's an unrealistic expectation to assume that because somebody gets housing, all of a sudden that the next step is going to happen, and the next step is to happen, and everything's going to be okay. Back in 1997, my first day, I worked for a program in downtown Portland called the Salvation Army Greenhouse. I was part of an alternative school, helping young people on the streets get their GEDs. And I sat down on a couch. And the one young man I sat down next to stood up and started screaming for me to get away from him. Again, this idea of like new adults in the room are seen with mistrust. And on my other side was a young woman. She was 7 months pregnant. She was taking her GED test, and she was nodding off from methadone, just trying to escape 7 years of a heroin addiction and from being on the streets. She initially hit the streets because her brothers tied her to a bed at age 13 and shot her with heroin. She then witnessed two of her brothers shoot their drug dealer and end up doing very long-term prison sentences. At that point, she ended up hitting the streets. Mom and Dad it was not a very healthy, stable home environment, clearly. The day I met her, she just kept nodding out. The GED test took her hours and hours and hours, her big swollen belly. And I took the test back, and I was like an eager beaver, kind of my first day, fresh 26-year-old, and I started to go through, and she had gotten every answer right. And so I said to the other teacher, I said, "Holy crap, do you know how smart that kid is?" She said, "Oh, I know. We were able to find her a scholarship for her to go to PSU. This is, again, 1997. She graduated from PSU. Things were going pretty great. We helped pay for her Kaplan training. She took the GRE. She ended up in law school at a very prestigious East Coast law school. Mind you, now at this time, all three of her brothers are in prison. Her dad has fled, and her mom is suffering from a very intense mental health disease. She goes out to the East Coast. She brings her young son with her, who's now a 7-year-old. She aces the first year of law school. The first semester of her second year in law school, she takes a bottle of pills before her final exams. She gets kicked out of school. She ends up hitting the streets and ends up in a long battle with alcoholism. Her son ends up having to come back to Portland to live with her mom, and I spent a lot of time with him. They were living in very subpar conditions, and as I said, her mom was very unhealthy at the time. This goes on for years and years, right? As I started, nothing's linear. We stayed in touch very, very intently. So we talked several times a week all these years. Today is her last day of law school. She graduates May 14th and is on to taking the bar in both Pennsylvania and New York State to work in prison law. I tell this story because you just don't know. You never know. I absolutely believed I would outlive this young woman. The first day I met her, I really could not have imagined that she could make it here. But we kept believing and supporting, and there she is, and she's an incredible example of how long it takes and how important the depth of caring, loving, supportive relationships are in a young person's life. So I'm not going to, I was supposed to start a watch, and I didn't. Just let me know when I run out of time. I'm going to run out of time before these slides do. I have been called by my coworkers Our Lady of Perpetual Words. So I apologize for that you were the victims of it. Okay, so we all know that even though we're all legally adults in this country at the age of 18, most Americans experience a much longer transition into practical adulthood and economic independence. In fact, they say right now that the average age a young person leaves home is 28. I have a 3-year-old. He better. I think I'll be like 90 by the time he's 28 anyway. So, for most of us, this transition is supported often financially by our families, But we know that many youth aging out of foster care have no family support to rely on. For them, the transition to adulthood sometimes just happens overnight when they exit the system, whether they're ready or not. Oh, mind you, please, that anything I say is not a critique at all. It's simply just my experience and what I've seen. I'm deeply grateful for the work you do, and as a foster parent, I'm deeply grateful for the system and the support that it's providing. Maybe I'll skip my 12 system recommendations at the end. Changes. We'll see about that. Okay, we're good. We'll be way done. Anyway, for many of these youth, life on the streets is just a short walk from foster care. One thing we do know is that children who have been in foster care are at greater risk of becoming homeless at an earlier age and to remain homeless for a longer period of time than any other youth. Now, the federal government attempted to address this reality with the Fostering Connections Act, but even at 21, many foster youth still aren't ready for independence and are at increased risk for homelessness and housing instability. The transition plan is an investment in the future. So why is this work important? Well, there are a few things that we know. Research shows that youth transitioning from out-of-home placement are more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system, are at higher risk of teen pregnancy and parenting, have lower reading and math skills and high school graduation rates, have disproportionately high rates of physical, developmental, and mental health problems. They're more likely to experience homelessness, and they have higher rates of alcohol and drug abuse. They have higher rates of unemployment and likelihood of dependence on public assistance, and are likely to be living with parents or other relatives within 1 year of leaving placement. Okay, I apologize for these stats. I don't know what I was thinking. So we know that anywhere between, say like 22 and 28,000 youth emancipate from foster care each year. There's a ton of different stats on how many end up homeless, but I did talk to some of my friends in Multnomah County, and they are sticking by their 50% of former foster youth will end up homeless within 18 months. That may be a little high. 4 years after leaving care, 46% of youth lack a high school diploma. Girls in foster care are 6 times more likely to give birth before the age of 21 than the general population. Over 40% of foster youth are moved 3 or more times, and 11% are moved 5 times or more, and that's a national number. They're 5 times more likely to experience PTSD. Over 70% of all state penitentiary inmates have spent some time in the foster care system. 1 in 4 will be involved in the juvenile justice system within 2 years. Parents with a history of foster care are almost 2 times as likely as parents with no history to see their children placed in foster care become homeless. We are right now experiencing a really dramatic increase in pregnant and sometimes parenting youth, and I'm not sure why that increased, but we certainly, the system, the homeless youth system, as well as all of the other organizations, are really looking at this closely and really trying to offer as many guardrails and supports as possible. Overall, they say that 27% of the homeless population spent time in foster care, and as I already mentioned, we know that 30% of young people coming into the homeless youth system in Multnomah County report having had a history of foster care. So why is it so much harder for foster kids to achieve and maintain stability? There's lots of reasons, but I'm just going to look at these 4. Psychophysiological problems from depression to panic disorders and addiction often contribute to instability. These issues can spring from the original trauma of being taken from one's parents. The separation is traumatic, even if it rescues a child from an abusive or neglectful caregiver. The separation can be as wounding as the parental behavior that triggered it. Another side effect of separation is a natural resilience to agencies. As I said, youngsters raised in the system often don't trust any agency-based folks. Just walking in the door can be hard for them, even if doing so means accessing services that could help them. As we know, and as was mentioned already, the system itself can be underfunded and at times not working as well as it could be. This can also be an obstacle to stability. And also, I'm going to spend some more time talking about this, but social capital. Many homeless foster youth, unlike their non-homeless foster peers, have been moved from placement to placement at times, but they end up lacking the natural support networks. So adult relatives, neighbors, teachers, church members, that might help them stay on a healthy plan. One of the things that has struck me is that a lot of the young people we work with who have had a history of foster care are often, A, not very willing to talk about it, and B, seem to have less resilience in some ways. And I don't have any scientific reason for explaining that, but I know that definitely the young people who have come out of the system have a tendency to seem much more vulnerable than some of the other kids that we meet. If we know that youth exiting the foster care are particularly vulnerable to homelessness, what can we do to support this transition for the youth who are most likely to become homeless? And how do we know which of these youth are most likely to become homeless? These are super challenging questions, and I don't actually assume that I can answer them by any means, but Washington's State Department of Social and Health Services released a report last year, and their aim was to do just that. Their team was able to determine specific risk factors and protective factors for homelessness that estimates a youth's likelihood of becoming homeless after exiting foster care. So these are the main risk factors that they came up with. Oh, I love that photo. We did a series of pictures with young people wearing these very heavy steel angel wings. Race. We know that African American youth are this is what their study found, that African American youth are 1.8 times more likely to become homeless. Youth who are parents are more than 2 times as likely to become homeless. Youth who had been homeless or who received housing assistance in the past were nearly 2 times as likely to become homeless. Youth who frequently change schools, and I know that a lot of work is being put into ensuring that kids aren't changing and moving from school to school. Particularly those who change schools more than 4 times in 3 academic years were 2 times as likely to become homeless. Having more than 1 foster care placement increased a youth's likelihood for homelessness by 1.5 times. Youth with multiple convictions, in their study, they determined that was 4 or more, and youth who had been in juvenile rehabilitation were 1.5 times more likely to become homeless. And there were other risk factors: indication of mental health treatment needed in prior 24 months, someone experienced an injury in 24 months, or the history of behavior issues found in child welfare records. In addition to these risk factors, researchers have identified 2 strong protective factors: placement with a relative while in foster care and a high GPA. This data simply provides a compelling demonstration in how we can use data to prevent homelessness by targeting resources towards those who are the most vulnerable. While predictive tools clearly cannot identify every single youth who will become homeless, they can definitely, hopefully, guide our communities to the most efficient use of our limited resources. By supporting the most vulnerable youth exiting foster care and their transition into adulthood, we can ensure that the risk of homelessness never becomes a reality. Now, I think all of you know this, but a good plan is very critical for success for a young person. I won't go through all of these, but these are some things that have come up in a bunch of my research that are helpful in a plan. A good plan is critical for youth to be successful. However, even more critical are strong, consistent, reliable relationships with healthy adults that youth can utilize for support and safety. To effectively meet the developmental needs of young people in foster care, case planning must go beyond foster care placement and the coordination of services. It must support the key task of adolescence for all young people, establishing a stable and secure identity. For young people in foster care, the process of identity development can be extremely challenging, as they've often experienced disconnection from their families, their communities, their cultures, and this is information that's critical to one's life story. Case planning must be used to support a young person in building, like I talked about earlier, but I want to talk more about in building social capital across all critical domains: family, school, peers, community. Social capital provides young people with relationships and networks that support their healthy development and is particularly critical for older young people in foster care, given the many relationship disruptions in their lives and the new developmental demands of adolescence and young adulthood. Enhancing a young person's social capital can help to build many of the protective factors associated with supportive relationships, and it's known to be the strongest contributor to the development of resilience. Often, if there's a lack of social capital, it limits opportunity, but it also dramatically increases the risk that a relatively benign incident can become the catalyst for homelessness. Permanent connections for a youth are a key marker for successful outcomes. So, where to start? Young people need to lead the process of making decisions on issues that affect them in order to support their successful transitions to adulthood. A case planning process that authentically involves and is led by a young person has enormous potential for positively impacting the scope and reach of a young person's social capital. It also gives youth practice in cultivating and developing their voice. Youth who have experienced a lifetime of not being heard are not going to find their voice naturally. Youth-led case planning can play a critical role in supporting young people in foster care and developing a positive and secure identity. The case planning process may assist in understanding the normative and unique developmental challenges they face in identity formation. It could place priority on developing and supporting a family structure for young people as a critical environment in which identity development occurs. It can support young people of color in developing their racial and ethnic identity and integrating race and ethnicity into their larger sense of self. It recognizes that during sexual changes of puberty, issues of gender and sexual identity become especially relevant for all young people, including young people in foster care, and we need to support young people in exploring and navigating the identity issues related to sexuality, gender, and sexual orientation. I have heard just harrowing and horrific stories throughout the years of young people just not being accepted and being treated horribly in their homes, and mainly due to their sexuality and gender, and this is due to their sexuality and gender identity. And we can support young parents in foster care in navigating the multiple identity challenges they face as they develop and integrate a personal sense of identity and the identity role of parent. Studies indicate that one implication of adolescent parenting is that a young person has less opportunity to develop an autonomous sense of self. And I hear that repeatedly from the young women that we work with. It's always an either or. It's either I give my baby up for open adoption so that I can go to school, I can be successful, I can move forward, or I raise my baby. And I never hear those two things connected. All right, how are we doing on time here? We're pretty good. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna get you out of here early. So I want to go one step further. By the way, I was not asked to go this one step further, so I apologize for that. But I just want to talk about some possible other things that can be done to prevent homelessness as an outcome, right? As we know, 30% of the young people alone in Multnomah County experiencing homelessness have had foster care experience. We see an average of about 55 young people a day at PAIR. We would see 16.5, I think is the math, less people a day if we could look at foster care as a prevention tool for homelessness. One thing we know is that we should address the disproportionality of youth from communities of color. The current model ensnares a disproportionate number of youth of color. One possible thing we could do is more effectively partner with and empower communities of color in order to change policy and design and to mirror their needs and values around caring for children and the transition to adulthood, like utilizing extended family. Until these continuums of care are further engaged, youth and families will continue to experience failure in the system. Oh, my slides were... Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Correct. So, yeah. Well, yes, there would be more kids, right, of color. So just from like, but the proportions may not be, right? But they may be. What we know is, so for instance, we know that the homeless population in general in Multnomah County, the African American homeless population increased by 48% over the course of 2 years. What we know is that that yes, we have a small percentage of young people of color in our communities, but they are overrepresented in the system. Is simply what I mean by that. Are there any other questions? We can take a little question break. I'd love to answer questions. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you talk about street culture,
Yeah.
and you think for members who are reviewing cases where the youth may not want to, they've decided, they've elected to be on the
To leave, yeah.
and sometimes they'll come to court too, and sometimes they won't. But what suggestions might you have? And I guess every kid's going to be different, but how do you start to approach working with that youth to try to just get them to connect at all? Sometimes it's so, I don't want to have anything to do with the system. I've got my family here, and that's always a struggle. Is how do you productively try to reach them?
Yeah, it's a huge struggle. And even the stats that I presented earlier, that I mean, I think they're actually larger than that. I think there's even more kids on the streets, and because one of the things is that we're not effectively engaging them, or they're not ready. And both, I think, are true. And I've thought about this quite a bit when I was preparing this, and I thought about how do we reach these kids? I have a number of young people I see on a daily basis who have left the system. However, the system is still a resource for them, right? That foster care would still be an option, and that they're highly unwilling to engage, and that they feel for some reason that the streets are a better answer for them at this time. I think one place to start would be in educating caseworkers and case management and floor staff and outreach workers within the homeless youth system. We aren't super educated on the foster care system necessarily. I know there's some really good work from New Avenues for Youth, but one way would be is to figure out a way that we could actually work together a lot more closely, because we have the relationships, and we often are the point people and the only people that some of these kids will engage with. And so that may be the place to start, is figuring out how do you utilize folks like myself to talk to young people to help them re-engage with a system that has opportunities for them. Yeah, but I'll think about that more. That's a great question. Yes? Yes, absolutely. So PAIR stands for Project. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. I was just getting the microphone.
Hello. Oh, so the question was how the young people come to PAIR. Are they referred, or does she go out and search them in the streets, or do they just come and knock on the door? And I wondered what P:/EAR stood for.
So PAIR. PAIR stands for Project, Education, Art, and Recreation. The colon came from a place, two things. One is I was, at the time in my life, enthralled with E.E. Cummings, who puts punctuation and capital letters wherever he wanted or didn't want. And my coworker was very entrenched in kind of the modern. And so the colon sort of met both of our aesthetics. Honestly, it was a very bad decision. You cannot Google PAIR with the colon in it. None of our legal forms can have a colon in it, so everyone calls and they call us P-ear, which is odd and fine with me. Anyway, it was a youthful decision, possibly, at the time. One of the things we loved about it, though, was that it did not address their homelessness. And the most important thing to me is not, hi, how are you? How am I going to solve your homelessness? The most important thing to me is, hi, how are you? How am I going to help you grow from adolescence into a healthy, stable adulthood? And part of that means addressing your homelessness. So PAIR, interesting enough, we do, as you've seen, there's been some artwork spattered throughout here. We have a very extensive art program, and one of the things that is really important within the art world is that one of the things you first draw in learning still life drawing are pairs. And also the alternative education symbol is a pair. We didn't know any of that, though. So, yes, hi.
I have a comment about the system
Yeah.
that you're referring to. Recently, a report was issued, and I hope everybody in this room has read it or will, which reports and concludes, among other things, that in almost every measure of federal standards that the Department of Human Services is supposed to meet in these cases, they're failing. And this is, in reality, a system. And so that means, I think, quite realistically, that the courts, the lawyers, and CRB review boards are complicit in that failure to the extent that they give the agency a pass because of claimed lack of resources or how hard the caseworker is working. My point here is that the system that's available for these people may not be the system that they've experienced. And particularly this age group, we have a special focused board in Marion County that deals with just adolescents. And comprehensive transition planning, the kind of planning you're talking about, is probably the biggest failure. The second biggest failure is that at some point in the ages of these children, the focus becomes on controlling behavior rather than healing the trauma. Yeah. So I think that's really the reality that we have, and so maybe the first step is for us, frankly, to do our job.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think one of, especially with older youth, right now the system is set up as a safety mechanism, right? It's crisis-oriented, but we have a number of young people who what they really need are the supports to be independent, the supports that what it takes, how many people have children or adolescent-age children or have had adolescent-age children, but what it takes to really help a young person move into adulthood. And I think the young people that I've talked to tell me that that the system has taught them how to be very passive, and that they have not felt like that they wait for things to happen, and if they're not in crises, that their needs are not going to get met. And I think that's definitely something that we can look at moving forward. Yes?
Just a second. Observations I've got is that there are children who have been groomed for abuse, and the very first thing they are taught, if you tell, you will no longer be loved by the people who should be taking care of you. And that starts long before they're ever out of elementary school. It happens long before they even get to middle school in a lot of cases. Now, I'm very distressed by the fact that the Oregon legislature seems to want to rephrase access to certain things to protect the youth. And they say, you don't have to tell somebody, you can come us. To me, they're almost codifying the fact that you must keep a secret. Now, to me, that's a very damaging message And so when I watch cases go through, it's like I can see a kid who's been trained not to talk about it. They're not going to ask for the help. They've been told that's a punishment. We need to go much further back into the abuse of children and to not tolerate the grooming of children in the first place. Because we're dealing with consequences and we're dealing now with symptoms. We're not all the way back to the root cause. We need to go all the way back that far and re-examine every single child service the state has, because right now we're piling Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid. And I watch policies come out that says, you can't ask that question. Nobody can ask, is this child on birth control? Well, I don't want to see a pregnant homeless youth. But we're not supposed to ask that question. Okay? We're not getting to the root because our hands are tied. So we're going to have to rip off some Band-Aids and start all over.
Thank you. Yeah.
We really do have the option to find out what type of medications our kids are on. That is a question we are allowed to say, and is this child on any medications? And we can't be specific, but that should be part and parcel.
Yes, I'm a CASA, and I won't tell you what county I'm from, but I've had, in 10 years, I've had 3 cases of adolescent youth. All 3 were girls. Not one made a successful transition. And what I have to observe, and unfortunately it's not a good thing, as I got to know these young women, it became evident that if they were going to make a successful transition, it would require almost a one-to-one skilled mentorship for a couple of years. Because we're talking about such the need for and the lack for of trust, all the blanks that need to be filled in financially and other kinds of blanks, life skills, and I've had many experiences of trying to get help in transition planning to find out that there's a long waiting list and one person in the county doing this kind of work. And I found it just at the end, frankly, depressing to find that we don't have, evidently, the political will to devote the resources we need to try to provide the kind of mentorship and training for these young people and recovery of things that have been lost a long time ago. And so I do protest that we don't have the will to provide the means to do this kind of transitional planning with children. And that's why I don't want you to know what county I'm from, because we have tons of poverty, tons of drug addiction, tons of homelessness. In one school, the specialist tells me there's as much as 40% of the high school population is in some form homeless.
Yeah.
So we're not dealing with the problems in a way that is effective, and evidently we don't want to.
I think one observation that was made to me by several youth that I've talked with, as well as some other caseworkers, is that the system is it prioritizes equality instead of equity. And so if every young person is kind of required to get the same dose of services, and it sounds like they don't even, they wait in line even for that those who need it most aren't getting the bulk of the resources that they need. Some young people may need a bump here and there. Another part of the system that the kids tell me is problematic and hard for them is that I know that when I went away to college, I would go home and I would eat my mom's food and hang out, and my dad would take me out, and that I had a safe, stable place to return to. And I don't know how we would address that, but certainly figuring out a way to create, this, like I said, the social capital for young people so that when they do hit bumps, when they do need support, that there's someone there. I always say that the most important thing that I have done over the last 18 years, I do not save lives. I witness them. And that young people just, they need desperately to have people witnessing their lives and helping them navigate what can often be a treacherous path.
Things I see on TV, and I don't know that it's always true, but you have this image when a kid is going from one foster home to another, and they're in a hurry, and they're told to put their belongings in a garbage bag, a black plastic garbage bag, and how that dehumanizes them. And it's a terrible, terrible image to take with you. The other thing is that maybe when kids hit 12, we need to kind of have a triage system. And triage does not take cases in an emergency room in the order in which they come in. It takes them in the order of what their need is. And we need to consider that once they hit 12 and 13, they are high need, whether they know it or we know it or not.
The statistics prove that, yes. And also, I mean, if we're talking about transition planning, I think that we need to have the conversation that it begins really young, which is building healthy, stable home and family-like environments for young people. Many of us started learning that at very young ages. Yes.
How the kids come to you.
Oh, sure. I did not answer that. Absolutely. So we're located down in Old Town, right down the street from the train station in Portland. We had, prior to that, for the first 7 years PAIR was in operation, we had been in downtown Portland, where a lot of the services are. When we moved to Old Town, we sort of jumped Burnside, and we're worried that the kids weren't going to find us. Our daily average has gone up from 35 kids a day to 55 kids a day, and they're spending a lot more time with us. So the move ended up to work in our favor. We also have a ton more space. In that time, we had been a very small staff. 3 of us started the program, and we did it all. We worked the floor, we raised the money. We take no government funding at all. We're about $900 to $1 million a year privately funded, starting next year. So we never had the capacity for outreach. So we've always relied on other services, outreach organizations, case managers, to guide kids to our door. But mostly the majority come because other kids drag them. In 14 years that we've been open, we've never called the police. PAIR is kids feel very safe at PAIR. It doesn't look or have the feel of kind of a typical social service agency. Our focus is much more around building the intrinsic and internal skills and sense of worth that a young person needs to grow up. So we don't do things like provide housing or showers or formal case management. We do a lot more things like love, trust, and hope, and kicking down doors and gaining resources for young people. So we see about 55 kids a day and up. Oh, right. So we are now a staff of 9, and growing. I think we'll cap off at about 10. The 3 of us who founded the program continue to co-direct together, for better or for worse. But it has been an amazing journey, that's for sure. We are funded primarily through individuals, private foundations, and we do a big annual fundraiser that's an auction and silent auction and paddle raise. It was last Saturday, which is why my voice is a little off. But there was about 430 people there, and it raises about a third of our annual operating costs. No federal, state, city money, no. Part of that was mostly so that we could remain really flexible, and that there was that I am not interested in a long, lengthy process for someone to get an ID. I want to get rid of all of that nonsense really quickly, so my staff can get a kid an ID in half an hour. I mean, I just don't want to. I didn't want to create a lot of barriers. We also don't have a lot of middle management. It's really sort of hands-on. As the executive director of the program, I still work directly on the floor with the kids. I run our pregnant parenting group, and I also run our barista school. We have 2 job training programs. One is teaching kids the fine art and science of becoming baristas. We are opening a walk-up espresso window in Old Town, if you're ever down there, in July. That will be a job training program for kids. It'll have its own pear flair to it. It will not look like traditional workforce job training programs, but should be very fruitful and interesting, and definitely, hopefully, helps young people take the next leap. And then we're launching a bike mechanic school, teaching kids how to fix bikes. There's a big part of the population where bike culture is really important to them. We hope to start a small business from there as well. So, yeah.
What's your success rate been over the years with the kids?
Well, I didn't hear the second part. What was our success rate?
With the kids once they leave or...
Yeah, that is, I cannot answer that in a formal number way. So let's go back to the young woman I was talking about that I met in 1997. It is now 2000. She's graduating law school in 2016. It's taken an enormous amount of time and resources to get to this place. So I think that we have to look at a much longer, broader time period for success, because we are not set up to say, okay, if you participate in 10 art workshops, then you will be successful, right? Because I believe that it's sort of all intertwined, and success can look very differently for every kid. We do set up short-term and long-term goals with every young person that comes in the door. And for some folks, quite frankly, the fact that they can remain in this space without yelling at somebody is a huge success. And from there, then, we can kind of open the door. It can also be a transient population. Young people come and go. Like I said, it's never linear. So even if I told you, well, let's see, 60% of our kids from last year ended up housed, although that's not a number, but let's just say that they may not still be housed 6 months after that, right? It sort of goes like this. So we set small goals within each of our programs. How many kids graduate from barista school? How many kids go on to get jobs? How many kids report, a deeper, richer sense of self? It is really hard to measure the kind of work we do. And I think about that. I think about if someone asked me if my 3-year-old was successful right now. I'm not sure. Oh, gosh, I hope so. But anyway, I think it's important to look at outcomes and measurements. And I think it's really also super important to be very self-reflective and to ensure that the work you're doing is actually meeting a need. So we're engaged in a lot of that conversation right now. But it is hard to mark when they start from here and end up here because it's such a squiggly line. But the beautiful thing is that I see a ton of amazing success. I see so many young people thriving and moving forward with their lives. And they keep in touch with us for years and years and forever, hopefully. Yes?
What was your background before you became involved in care?
I was Portland's surliest waitress. I was fired from, I think, 8 restaurants. Yeah, I was really good at it. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My dad was a Chicago cop, and my mother was a Chicago public school teacher. My dad worked in the Robert Taylor homes, or the housing projects that line the whole south side of Chicago. I had a really urban and kind of gritty and sort of social justice-based blue-collar upbringing. I came out to the Pacific Northwest for a 3-month backpacking excursion. I was telling Christina it was after I had been working for the Italian mafia in a restaurant and made a lot of money, and came out to just play, and I fell in love with the Northwest. I have a teaching license. I had a teaching license. My dream was to teach high school English literature. So that is my other secret passion. I find this to be, I started to teach. My first period classroom had 52 kids in it, 7:30 in the morning. I went into the teacher's lounge and I said, how is this possible? I don't even have 52 desks. And they said, well, they're not going to all show up. They almost all showed up every day for 6 months. And they would sit on the floor, they would sit on each other's laps, they would sit wherever they could. I became super highly disengaged with the public school system. And I found that my own strengths were working with people from an emotional, not just their intellects, but their emotional and physical lives as well. So I was working at Sisters of the Road in downtown Portland and found my way to the Salvation Army Greenhouse, where I became the director of their alternative school, helping young people get GEDs. And then we started PAIR after that program closed. So I didn't get to the rest of my system recommendations, but if you would like them, let me know. They do address things such as trauma and strengthening safety nets, and how are we going to, enhancing ILPs, which need some work, to say the least. Building social capital, incorporating youth voice, creating adequate housing supports, improving adolescent placement, foster care recruitment. I want to know why I wasn't targeted. I would have been, I am, I think, a good foster parent. I think we could do a lot of work on recruiting folks who have experience working with adolescent-aged young people. And then, let's see, I'm almost done, I swear. I'll just go through these so I can get to the end, because the pictures at the end are really great. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Beth. I am so glad that you made the trek down here and joined us. This was very good. And I would just urge everybody to really go back, and as you're reviewing cases, to make sure that that caseworker and DHS has that sense of urgency with every case, especially every case of a 12-year-old or 13-year-old or 14-year-old, and make sure those 14-year-olds are involved in planning their own case, and do whatever you can to try to get these young people at your reviews. They need to be there. They need to be involved. You need to be hearing directly from them. This afternoon, you have 8 options. You get to choose 2 of them. If you get to a session and it's full, please move on to a different session. The first session starts at 3. It goes for an hour, then there's a short break, and then another session. And then at 5:15, we'll have a no-host bar set up. There'll be some time before dinner starts at 6. So enjoy your afternoon, and we'll see you tonight. Thank you.